you got three levels to the sort of government architecture of the censorship industrial complex. You have the U.S. national government, our federal government, which turns every 4 years on elections. Then you've got the substructure of that in the states. You've got every state level government, and then you've got international governments. So you've got the state, federal, and international side of this. And all three of those are in flux in terms of the state of freedom versus censorship and the policies that they promote.
Right.
All three of those are angles of attack, and manipulable to coerce platforms into allowing or not allowing speech.
Right.
And so what we did during the period between 2020 and 2024 on the freedom side of the free speech censorship spectrum is we had states like Florida and Texas do these kind of digital Bill of Rights type bills in order to try to enforce more freedom than what the tech platforms were trying to do with the censorship. And so this goes both ways, where you have the red states were trying to have these freedom bills and the blue states are trying to have these censorship bills. And so this is playing out right now. And there's a special focus because the blob has lost so much of its federal government censorship powers. So what I have pulled up right here is the 2025 Democracy Playbook by Norm Eisen. Are you familiar with Norm Eisen?
Mm-mm.
So Norm Eisen is a good name to know. He is the legal hatchet
Norman?
man. Yeah. Normie.
So
Norm Eisen is the guy who is behind, he's the lawyer who's behind the Trump indictments, the Trump impeachments. I think he drafted 10 articles of impeachment for Donald Trump before he was even inaugurated in 2017. He was the former U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic under the Biden administration. He was also the Biden administration White House ethics czar. So every time
Tom Brand.
Yeah. So they put the worst people. It's like Tony Fauci's, wife was the NIH ethics czar, during it's like
It's perfect.
It's you ever read The Fountainhead, the Ayn Rand book?
No.
It's this character. The villain is this guy Ellsworth Toohey, and he wants to take over the world effectively in his own little Machiavellian way, and I think he's like he majors in religion in college, and he brags everyone told him not to do it because it's a path that goes nowhere, and he's like, no, actually, if you understand and this is like what ethics is. Like ethics is like the yes no button. So if you control that, you control the all this. But so Norm Eisen is this. He coordinates all of the law affairs, like all the lawsuits against Trump, like all the lawsuits against him trying to shut down USAID or the State Department's Global Engagement Center. But he's this big transatlantic blob operative. He does all the international stuff. Works closely with all these NATO, State Department, USAID groups. And so every year for the past 7 years, he's put out this democracy playbook, which is like the bat signal to the blob about what they all need to do to stop their common political opponents. And so this year, in January 2025, he put this out, the 7 pillars to defend democracy in 2025 beyond. And if you go down to the list of pillars, probably in the thing, you'll see I can decode these. There you go. So protect elections, which is going to mean you need to let dead people stay on the rolls. You need to make sure that there's no need for a signature for mail-in ballots. Defend rule of law, which is just going to mean arrest everybody in the Trump administration and protect our own people from being arrested. Fight corruption just means, find a predicate to arrest them.
Right.
Reinforce civic and media space. This is like this translated language for meaning keep the money gun. This is a month before we announced the shutdown of USAID. And he actually says in this memo about how USAID was actually good under Trump 1.
Of course.
And we need to use that money gun to, pay our friends in the university centers and the NGOs and in the media. But pillar 6 says counter disinformation. Right? We need to. So actually, if you run a search for USAID, you'll see this. Just type in USAID in the search. See, so it says, so this is under reinforced civic and media spaces. So this should include supporting investigative consortiums such as the Corruption Reporting Project. Now, the Corruption Reporting Project, they hate me. Half of their budget came from USAID and the State Department. Oh, there's nothing more corrupt than the Corruption Reporting Project. Let me tell you this. They took USAID funds and dug up dirt on Rudy Giuliani so they could be used for impeaching Trump in 2019. So like we sponsored our own, impeachment of our president through USAID funding. Again, the money is supposed to go out to influence the world around us to make things better for Americans, and it ends up being used to impeach our own democratically elected president. Wait, hit the enter or just go down 37 times. You'll see he mentions it. Okay, so let's see this. So this is on the countering disinformation. It says at the user level, social media companies should prioritize digital media literacy. That means media literacy means if you read the wrong media sources, you are media illiterate. You need to get your mind right. So like NewsGuard bills itself as a media literacy company now, and getting schools to not allow your YouTube videos to be played for students on public Wi-Fi, lest they become media illiterate because they're reading the wrong sources. But so like one of the things that Norm Eisen says is a good thing is that Meta partnered with USAID in 2023 to promote an initiative of 200 university students in Indonesia promoting media literacy. And YouTube. Meta and YouTube created digital literacy programs in recent years and all this. But if you run a search for Brazil, you'll get to why I'm bringing this up. Oh, wow, 14. Okay, again.
Did you see this Wikipedia blacklist thing?
Oh, yeah. That's been around for a while, yeah. Well, but that's the media literacy strategy.
Right.
Wait, click enter again. I'll tell you when to stop. Again. Oh, well, you see, wait, scroll back up. You'll see he's bragging about the Digital Services Act in the EU. And YouTube eliminated
17 critical policies that had limited the spread of misinformation.
Right, so that's why they want the EU and Brazil. So wait, scroll down again or hit the Brazil thing. I know where this is, isn't it? One more. Okay, wait. Okay, there. We'll stop. Yeah, stop right there. Okay, so on the Wikipedia thing, by the way, this is the media literacy strategy. So they're doing these media literacy laws in California has mandatory media literacy K through 12. New York now has mandatory. Illinois has mandatory. All these blue states, and they're creeping into the purple and red ones. And this is like required NewsGuard style blacklists of the kind of media that you can use for research assignments in high school and middle school, the kind of websites you can access because all these schools are now having like school issued laptops,
right?
So that you don't get distracted on your own device sort of thing, and they can put you in a little fishbowl of the kind of information you can see and not see. And so these media literacy programs say, well, these websites, these blacklisted websites will make you media illiterate, so you can only stay within the confines of these websites. And one of them is Wikipedia. There's something called the SIFT method that media literacy theorists use. It's basically the opposite of critical thinking. It's like, don't do your own research because that leads you down a rabbit hole and turns you into a right-wing populist.
Right.
So you should only sift casually through the first 10 results on google.com and whatever Wikipedia says. This is like theory in media literacy, is the SIFT method. But effectively what this means is, because these anyone from one side of the aisle, or anyone who's from one ideological side of thinking, because there are left-wing populist accounts that get censored on this. It's like, are you anti-NATO? Are you, like the Gray Zone, for example, is like a left-wing populist site. Like they're not Republican by any stretch. They don't, like Trump or whatever, but they have that kind of like old school Bernie thing where he wanted to take away war funding to pay for free medical care and free housing and free education. And so they will end up, because they're against the State Department and NATO and USAID and this whole stakeholder blob and these big corporations, they'll end up on a, media literacy blacklist and a Wikipedia blacklist. They are blacklisted on Wikipedia. But what that means is that like people have to, like the New York Times has to cover their own people's scandals for it to be entered into history. Like the historical account of something, like Wikipedia does not allow primary source reporting.
Right.
Only secondary sources. So like unless the New York Times covers one of their own people's scandals, it's inadmissible in history. Like the blacklist is like Fox News, Breitbart,
Right.
Zero Hedge, great. Like you like can't tell the history of Hillary Clinton unless the New York Times has like accidentally reported something damaging to her.
Right.
And it's the same thing now in schools with media
Did you see
literacy.
that Bill Clinton had everything about him and Epstein scrubbed?
Yeah, right.
Right when they started talking about the Epstein files?
Right. And it's like, well, who are you going to cite to cover it? Like, the only people who will cover that are people who don't like Bill Clinton. And so the only people who are, whitelisted are the ones who do.
Right.
So here's what Norm Eisen writes in the Countering Disinformation section. Although there has been some action on the federal level to place guardrails around new media, it is uncertain how next steps will evolve. This is in January 2025, before Trump took office. So they're afraid that the whole censorship industrial complex at the federal level is going to be shut down, and whether progress will continue. Progress for putting guardrails around speech.
Right.
Federal action may be uncertain, but pro-democracy proponents at the state level should consider wielding their considerable regulatory power to minimize the destabilizing effects of new media. So he's saying, listen, this is in January 2025. Shit, Trump's about to take office. We're probably not going to be able to do the USAID shit anymore. Probably not going to be able to do the CISA shit at DHS anymore. Probably not going to be able to do the FBI flagging posts anymore. Probably not going to be able to have the Pentagon Minerva Initiative shit flagging stuff anymore. Probably not going to be able to the State Department Global Engagement Center. We need to move our strategy to the state level. And this is what you see in California. This is what you see in Michigan. This is what you see in New York. There are 35 states that they have all these different things percolating in. And this is all like, this is coming out of the Brookings Institution by Norm Eisen. The Brookings Institution, I've shown CIA pay stubs going back to the 1970s and 80s where the CIA would send people to Brookings for their, intelligence training.
Right.
Brookings has its own, intelligence, bureau. For this stuff. But the fact is this whole State Department, USAID, CIA network just planning to move stuff to the states. And so you see, it's a two-part strategy. State level censorship laws, and then also saying they may find partners and allied regulators such as the EU and Brazil. The EU, as we talked about with the EU Digital Censorship Act, and Brazil, which kicked X out of the country and has imposed these massive fines. And so, I mean, this is literally the White House ethics czar for Obama and the chief litigator during the Biden administration of all things Trump world, explicitly telling the blob to move information, to do state level censorship laws, and to partner with the EU for censorship. And in the next tab that I had pulled up, this is a report from my foundation, FFO. We just published this week. Credit to our managing director, Alan Bakari, for this. This is remember we talked about the Knight Foundation, how the Knight Foundation sponsored Graphica, and they, also fund all the arts and cultural centers in Miami. Well, their Knight Institute, parked out of Georgetown, has this new counter disinfo hub that is pushing all these state regulation of social media laws. And if you scroll down through it, you'll see like some of the receipts. Like $107 million that they've spent on doing disinformation work, funding the NGOs, funding the censorship university centers, through all this. And if you just run you'll see like who's on there. It's James Baker. If you remember this, the former, what was it? General counsel or deputy general counsel for the FBI during the Twitter files. And then he moved over to the content moderation lawyer team, to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. He's still around getting paid by the Knight Foundation for censorship work, just like he was paid for censor it in the Knight in the Twitter files. But if you just Control F for the word state, you'll see that this Knight Foundation supergroup, which is doling out $100 million in grants to sponsor this kind of regulation. See that 35 they're promoting 35 different bills in 75 state bills to all punish social media companies for allowing algorithms that have that allow, basically counter blob speech. And then we clipped all these videos.
You were working in like the cyber program of where again?
State Department.
Of the State Department, right? And then you said, I think you mentioned that you got like a call or something from Facebook.
Yeah.
And they were getting pressure from other countries. It was Google.
Yeah.
So in some way, all these other countries, like in Europe and in South America, like Brazil, are censoring everything and somehow we're using these other countries to pressure us to censor the same way they're doing it, right?
Yeah. So our government is really
I gotta get rid of these things.
Yeah. Our government is really unique in that we have a First Amendment, which is this very ironclad protection against government's ability to compel the censorship of speech. There's no other country on planet Earth that has that protection. So what happened in Europe is you had this transatlantic agenda, this set of stakeholders who all profit off of what people call like globalist action. Like, for example, if there's going to be a transition in the energy market, there are all these stakeholders who are going to profit from that transition. They're going to, profit from the lithium and the cobalt rather than from the fossil fuels. And if you can argue, for example, well, this will hurt our military enemies like Russia because they are as John McCain said, a gas station with a military. When we transition the global market away from gas and we do these mandates away from gas, then we're knocking out two birds with one stone. But that requires this kind of global collective action. And also what happens in one of these countries impacts what happens in the other. When Donald Trump wins the election here in the U.S., that impacts what happens in Europe. When Poland just had an election, what happens in Poland's election will determine whether or not the U.S. war policy in Ukraine is as effective, because Poland is the big vector for the liquefied natural gas that the U.S. is shipping from Houston to use Ukraine's gas architecture. By cutting out Russia, if Poland decides actually we want neutrality with Russia and they don't want to allow these gas transits, or they don't get enough of a cut, then that would be a big problem. So this is a big transatlantic community, if you will, big transatlantic blob. And with the restrictions in the First Amendment, this capacity to censor the internet is limited with what can be done out of the U.S. federal government. They got away with it for a time, essentially from like 2017 to 2024, mostly because people didn't know what they were doing. They had not been exposed. They had not been sued. There was not really, political force mobilized to actually hold them accountable to the First Amendment. And as that has dropped off, we've cut the USAID funds. We've cut the State Department funds for this. We've cut the Pentagon programs doing this, most of them. We've cut the National Science Foundation funds for this. We've cut the DHS role in this. Like, they are now more and more reliant on foreign censorship laws that force U.S. social media companies to censor in order to keep their markets or suffer giant fines. So, like, for example, the Google call that I got in 2020 was about this set of regulations in Europe called the EU Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act. Now, the Digital Services Act is the Digital Censorship Act. That's like if you're providing digital services like social media platforms, you need to be answerable to our disinformation code of practice. You need to work with the EU Digital Commission to censor any narratives that the EU calls disinformation. Now, this was championed by the U.S. State Department as a way to get around the First Amendment. When they first started setting up the censorship architecture, they were very careful to try to structure it in a way that was in a legal gray area where they thought they might be able to get away with it. The Atlantic Council, which is, as I mentioned, was funded not just by the Pentagon, has 7 CIA directors on its board, and one of the biggest contributors is Adrian Arch, who runs all the arts and culture stuff in Miami. They wrote this memo in 2018, right before the first domestic censorship agency in the U.S. federal government was set up. It was called CISA, the It's got a really boring name, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Yeah, but well, all that means is elections at the time, anything that's deemed critical infrastructure
Right.
in the cyberspace is censorable by DHS's CISA unit.
Right.
So as I mentioned, on January 6, 2017, they said elections are critical infrastructure. So CISA could tell, it could essentially hire this outside group to tell companies to, ban anyone questioning Dominion, or then later they declared public health to be critical infrastructure. So anyone who questioned COVID, CISA did that too. But when the Atlantic Council was first coming up with this idea for CISA's censorship operation, they published a series of memos they called forward defense. It's not offense. It's forward defense.
Forward defense.
And
it's oxymoron.
Yeah. And what they said is, the only capacity we have that currently does internet censorship is the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which was set up in 2014 to censor ISIS propaganda, so that the State Department could tell YouTube and Twitter and Facebook to take down these ISIS accounts. And they kind of got away with it because it was foreign facing. It wasn't U.S. citizens, so they didn't really have First Amendment protection. And it was terrorism. And look at what just happened in Garland, Texas. Look what happened to the Ariana Grande concert. ISIS terrorism is bad, and they're recruiting people on Facebook and Twitter. And so they got away with that at that time. But then in 2016, when Trump won, the Global Engagement Center shifted to Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation. And then they just called Trump supporters Russians. They said, so this is now 2018. They said the problem is we can't censor, U.S. citizens out of the State Department. They said, well, okay. They literally have a memo on this. I think I posted the screenshots on my X account, but I don't mean to put Steve through all the muscle here. They said, well, what we could do is, this is really an intelligence operation. The CIA can go to Le Monde in France and tell them not to publish something. They can go to the Frankfurt Allgemeiner in Germany and tell them not to publish something. So they could go to the social media companies and tell them, tell them not to publish something. Mm-hmm. They said, but we can't do that domestically with the CIA. Because now technically you might be able to under some counterintelligence thing. This is how they saw it.
Isn't that what the Twitter files were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and who got busted in the Twitter files doing this? It was the Atlantic Council itself, which had this whole unit called the DFR lab that was flagging tens of thousands of posts. The Atlantic Council was formerly partnered with DHS, and it was their idea. Again, 7 CIA directors on their board, and they got 3 former DHS secretaries, Michael Chertoff and all these folks. They got Jed Johnson to co-sign this. He was the one who signed the executive order on January 6, 2017 to set this all up. And so they said, okay, well, how about the FBI? The FBI's got domestic jurisdiction, and it's an intelligence agency. They said, the problem with that is the FBI has a legal requirement as the investigative arm of the Justice Department to have a predicate of lawbreaking. And it's not illegal to support Donald Trump or to, later question COVID-19. So what's the only other domestic intelligence equity you have? You have 17 intelligence agencies. Only 2 of them are domestic, FBI, DHS. They said DHS is not beholden to the Justice Department. It can be standalone. They don't need a law-breaking predicate to do this. So they essentially, out of DHS, created this combination of the CIA's powers abroad with the FBI's jurisdiction at home. They actually bragged about this on tape at an October 2021 disinformation conference at CISA. They bragged about how they pulled off this structure of this kind of domestic CIA fusing these things.
Can't the CIA do it under counterintelligence?
Yeah, they could if it had a foreign nexus. In theory, they could say this is sort of like if it was just Russiagate stuff, it would be unseemly. It would have political blowback. They could probably argue because you can target a U.S. citizen who's accused of being a Russian agent under the CIA. This is how they were able to plant, spies, CIA spies on Trump's campaign. It was like they said, well, listen, there's a suspected Russian connection, and so we can spy on our own citizens to stop spies from foreign countries. That's like how they always get away with it.
Right.
This is how the CIA was sicked on Martin Luther King for example.
Right.
You know, like Martin Luther King, they said, well, his biggest financial backer is Stanley Levison. Stanley Levison is affiliated with the American Communist Party. The American Communist Party is affiliated with Russia, with the Soviet Union. So the CIA can spy on Martin Luther King. Anyway, wow. So what happened here is, I think like we're sort of on the general topic of like this Google call and what was happening in Europe. So they were aware at the time the thin ice they were skating on. I don't think they expected to get away with it for as long as they did. And then once they won the 2020 election, for about a year and a half, they went completely gangbusters on this until Elon purchased X, Twitter files, Republicans won the House, and then Jim Jordan led this big. Jim Jordan and Dan Bishop, who was incredible from the DHS subcommittee, led all these exposures. And then
didn't Jim Jordan subpoena YouTube files as well?
Yep, YouTube files, Facebook files, all that stuff.
I never saw much about the YouTube files.
They were good. I mean, it was basically.
Well, I imagine if the Twitter files are what they are,
yeah.
if we saw that they were having weekly meetings with the moderators and the FBI and the CIA, I imagine what YouTube could be, the place that was incubated by the CIA.
Yeah. They published like about 100 pages in it, like a summary report. But unlike the Twitter files, they didn't really give. A lot of it was more executive summaries than actually being able to see the cold, hard screenshots, you know, hundreds of them at a time.
Yeah.
So I think the rollout could have been a lot, but I don't know what kind of restrictions they're under when you subpoena that stuff to not make all of it publicly available. Like it may be only reviewable by, you know, congressional staffers and then the executive report. So they may have had restrictions on that, but they were very effective. But so what the State Department and the blob was lining up in the background of all of this was having other countries' regulatory bodies be able to do what the First Amendment would not let them do here. And the main weapon in that was the EU Digital Censorship Act. I'm not going to dignify it with the Digital Services Act because it's just a censorship act. What that does is, because, you know, Europe, no country in Europe has a First Amendment. But the things that are illegal are like hate speech and, you know, and the like. It's not like disinformation is not a legal crime. But what the EU does is this kind of supra-European body is it says even if it's not illegal in any country, this, you know, kind of insular EU governing body will be able to decide what disinformation is, and it will be able to tell the platforms that either you have to throttle that content or suppress it algorithmically, and also allow all of our vetted researchers to get inside access to all the internal platform data so we can create these topographical network maps of disinformation spreaders, or else you will suffer billions of dollars in fines. The penalty for noncompliance is 6% of global annual revenue under this law, which is in effect as we speak. 6% of global annual revenue.
In fines?
In fines for noncompliance with the Digital Censorship Act. Now, that means all of the revenue that like YouTube gets in India, in New Zealand, in Madagascar, in the United States, in Brazil, has to be turned over to the European Union if they don't comply with the censorship order. 6% of global revenue. A lot of companies, most Fortune 500 companies, operate at like a, what is the typical private equity fund milestone is like 8%, right? That's like a good return on investment where, the performance fee kicks in. And this is 6%, not of profit. Like
total.
Like 6% of all revenue.
Right.
Which means, a lot of companies don't even have a 6% profit margin,
right,
let alone, so the alternative is you lose the EU market. And how can you be a global social media platform without access to the 550 million people in Europe? So they're completely under the gun of this. And this is now all of the people who determine what disinformation, is are the worst people on earth that you can imagine to do this.
I can imagine.
Graphica has gotten over $7 million in Pentagon contracts for AI social media, for AI-based social media narrative monitoring.
Oh my God.
So Graphica started off as this essentially like CIA DoD contractor to help our intelligence and military folks identify ISIS propaganda on social media, identify, Boko Haram presence on social media. What they do is they create these keyword maps of the linguistic way of talking, the slogans, the keywords, the leaders, and then they create this topographical network map. It looks like a big ball of yarn with nodes and network links between them, so that you can, it looks like this. And so this is
wow.
wait, zoom out a little. Let's you want to see what these guys did with COVID, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just run it in a Google search for Graphica April 2020. This is bonkers what this group did here. I think if you type in infodemic Graphica April 2020. Now they work directly with NATO for this. They work with the NATO Stratcom COE. Graphica did. The info second link there. Yeah, right there. Boom. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and click download now. All right. Yeah. No. Yeah. If you click download now, it'll actually it should just open it up.
No, it wants me to register.
You have to register now?
Oh, shit. Fill out the consent form.
No way.
Full content. Wait. To access full content. No, it should download it.
Wait. Just try that. Yeah. Open a new tab.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
No way. Check your download tab.
This always happens. Every time I talk about something, because I've covered this a couple times.
They said Mike Benz fucking out a form on that website now.
Dude, DHS deleted a bunch of pages on this. The Arizona State University Censorship Center shut down its website.
All right, just fill it out, Steve. We'll keep riffing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, but well, why don't we start with the Taylor thing,
okay,
and then we'll come back to this so you can see the kind of stuff that they're involved in.
Perfect.
So I just registered, and now they want, thank you for your submission. Okay, I got it in my email.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if you got it, let's knock this out, because it's good background for seeing what they're going to say about Taylor Swift here.
Okay.
So you can
Perfect.
sort of see their way of seeing the world. But so just a little bit of background on this. So Graphica, again, they do this AI social media monitoring, and so they create essentially the hit list that NGOs and governments can use to tell platforms to take this down.
Okay.
So Graphica was one of the partners. Remember how I mentioned how on January 6, 2017, DHS got a get out of First Amendment free card by saying anything that questions elections is a DHS capacity to neutralize as a cyber threat.
Right.
Cyber misinformation threat actors are a threat to elections. And so Graphica was partnered with DHS to censor the 2020 election. Anyone who questioned mail-in ballots, if you got kicked off of YouTube for questioning mail-in ballots or early voting drop boxes or electronic voting machines, it's because Graphica drew you in a big-ass network chart. They ingested 859 million tweets and said 22 million of those tweets were misinformation because they delegitimized the election process. So then this is like their business model. They're a for-profit company.
Okay.
And so if you start at the top here, you'll see what they did. Now here's a crazy thing here. All right, if you start on page 1, and then I'll just guide you with Control Fs on this. So all right. So this was published in April 2020. But they started on this right away. Now understand again, Graphica, they're a contractor for DOD and CIA. Doing this first for terrorist groups, then for domestic political elections, and then for the COVID pandemic. According to their own website on Graphica.com, they said that they started ingesting data to create this report on December 16th, 2019. The pneumonia-like symptoms in Wuhan were first reported on December 12th, 2019. So according to their own report, they started creating the global network map of misinformation about the origins of COVID-19 the week that COVID-19 started. A DOD CIA contractor to censor opponents of the DOD and CIA, according to their own website, started this censorship project to censor the origins of COVID-19 the week it was discovered. Now, when I published that on my foundation site, they said, no. We actually started on January 16th, 2020, And we backdated the data to December 16th, 2019. I said, okay, well, even if that's the case, you started within a month. It wasn't even called COVID-19 at the time. It was still the coronavirus.
Right.
So within a month of the breakout, you have this, contractor for CIA narrative monitoring domestic. So if you look at this, if you scroll down now, you'll see. So this was a joint thing they did with the NATO Stratcom COE. And if you look at this, you'll see this is like their disinformation map. If you go down and you'll see conspiracy communities, Zero Hedge, Bill Gates and George Soros.
Whoa.
So and this is crazy. If you see it's pro-Kremlin voices. So
anti-CCCP activists.
So like run a control F for the word conservative, for example. Just control F. Okay, yeah. So okay. And you scroll up a little bit because I think right wing will also get a bunch of these. Okay, a few key analytical highlights. Okay, so what it shows is that the conversation became flooded with information sources in March, and these all these the large mega clusters of U.S. right wing accounts. And then if you scroll down, so this is targeting domestic political communities, partnered with NATO, which the U.S. government funds. They've gotten, again, at that time, over $7 million in Pentagon grants for this work, and they're targeting U.S. domestic conservative groups. Graphika's decade coronavirus disinformation map, seeded on disinformation-specific hashtags, reveals that while conservative groups have a larger total presence than liberal groups, the combined volume of activity from conservative groups is 27%, compared with 8% from left-leaning groups. It wasn't just the U.S. They also looked at Italy, France, all across the EU, Latin America. This indicates that not only are more right-wing accounts involved in the conversation, but these accounts are more active in their engagement than left-wing. This is about disinformation.
Wow.
So, how many times does conservative appear in this report? 35 times it says? Is that what that says?
It says 8.
Okay. Try right-wing. Right-wing. Yeah, 54 times.
Wow,
the French right-wing. The Italian. A global heat map partnered with NATO.
Scroll through it. See what else you can find. Yeah. Just keep keeping the down button. U.S. right-wing accounts, French right-wing have been, oh my God, dude. Anti-CCP and U.S. right-wing clusters include videos of Guo Wengui.
Right, it's like, but think about this. It's like
Corona is a bioweapon.
They're calling them anti-CCP groups. I mean, like is not Pentagon supposed to be?
Oh, and it has this crazy map for every month with color coded.
This was the heat map they used. Did you see this thing where Susan Wojcicki, the head of YouTube, just because YouTube just apologized. They just paid Trump $25 million for banning him, and then they apologized. Oh, the Biden administration made us censor all these videos, and
I want to talk about that. Yeah, we'll go into that.
Susan Wojcicki claimed that they took down 1 million videos that went against COVID orthodoxy. 1 million videos on YouTube alone. This is where they sourced this stuff from. Yeah, she died. Yeah, right. Yeah,
right after she got the vaccine.
Is that right?
I don't know if we actually know she got the vaccine, but
many such cases. But you see this. And all of these nodes are us. It's you and me.
Right.
And we're putting in the CIA Pentagon contractor working with the exact NATO Stratcom, the video we're about to watch. They're getting the heat map right at the start of COVID, January 2020. So if you just hit enter a bunch of times and you'll see like what they do, with just how deep this is. But like, for example, put in Bill Gates, put in Gates.
Because didn't Bill Gates have some crazy conference in New York right in November? Or
Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation sponsored Event 201.
Event 201, that's what it was.
Event 201, which had Avril Haines, the deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who then became the director of national intelligence, the head of the entire ODNI throughout the all of COVID. They had her. They had one of the heads of Chinese intelligence, and they did this multi-day simulation of how of a bat-borne coronavirus from China coming from a wet market. And then the fourth segment was how to censor the internet to stop it. They had a tabletop simulation for how to call this, questions about the origins, disinformation.
And this was before COVID-19 broke out.
This is October 2019. This is right beforehand. And the Gates, Gates who's invested in all these vaccine companies. But what you see is NATO is literally mapping out everybody who criticizes. How much would you need to pay a PR firm to get the power of NATO, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Pentagon to map everyone who criticizes you on social media so that those posts can be censored, so that your reputation can be pristine, so that all the policies you call for go unchallenged? They did this with Bill Gates. If you type in Soros, you'll see you'll see the right wing, left wing. They got everybody covered.
This is insane, man.
You see 16
this is
times.
So fucking scary.
Soros, yeah. And so 23 times mapping everyone who challenges George Soros. Now, again, all this stuff, Soros is invested in all these pharma companies, by the way. The Soros Management Fund is neck deep. They are ass to elbow deep in like Abbott Labs,
right.
AstraZeneca. They made a huge bet on AstraZeneca ahead of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which ended up being recalled, by the way. But like by that point, you already had the full force and credit of the U.S. government, telling everyone, get whatever vaccine becomes available, shove it up your butt. Doesn't matter which one it is. Could be Pfizer, could be Moderna, could be AstraZeneca, could be J&J. 23 times. And so Soros, when you see Soros co-investing in these CIA operations like he did when in the 1980s, when he was partnered with USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, and they're destabilizing all these Central and European governments, and then the Soros New York Management Fund, the hedge fund is betting on the foreign currency speculation. They're betting on the Forex markets, on the direction of these governments, while they're on the ground, essentially insider trading on, national security secrets, our covert operations. But you see this, Soros does this everywhere. And, he does this in Mongolia. He does this in Latin America. And so you'll always see Ned and Soros co-funding things. But just so you don't have to take my word for it, type in Graphica and NATO Stratcom COE. In fact, you can probably go to YouTube and do this. I've seen their YouTube videos together.
Okay.
Like new tab.
Graphica, NATO Stratcom.
Yeah, NATO Stratcom COE. Yeah.
You gotta type in COE.
Yeah, try COE.
After Stratcom.
And then type in COVID or something after that too, and you'll see this. There you go. Well, wait, scroll up. You'll see it right there. NATO Stratcom COE is partnered with social media analysis firm Graphica to analyze and counter disinformation. They're literally joint partners. And if you type in COVID, you'll see that they did this with this very report.
What is the state of this shit now? Is this still happening, or is they pulled this back, or what's going on?
So here you go. You'll see this. You'll see all that stuff there. And if you go to YouTube, you'll see it. If you just click video, you'll see a bunch of these joint videos that they've done together. Yeah, blah blah blah. There's a million of these. But,
because we were a victim of this all throughout this time. Our YouTube channel, we got put in purgatory many times, and now we're to the point where we're terrified to talk about it. The Section 230 thing is interesting. It was Section 230 or 40?
Yeah, 230.
230. So in 2020, the Democrats were threatening to pull this Section 230 thing from these social media platforms. And Section 230 basically is like a lawsuit shield for these giant companies, these social media companies that are essentially, like utilities, so that they're not liable for someone going on their platform and posting something, right?
Yeah.
And now it seems like after this Charlie Kirk assassination that the Republicans are doing this. You had Lindsey Graham just say something about Section 230. You had Pam Bondi. She just said something about hate speech and Section 230, but I think she walked it back.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I was watching this Tucker Carlson monologue that he did the other day, where he was showing basically all these Democrats in Congress and talking about threatening Section 230, talking to Kash Patel. Need to start talking about Section 230. They're talking about you, Kash Patel. They're saying mean things about you. And what is going on with that? And can you explain to people, can you give them a better context of this whole Section 230 thing and using that as this stick against these social media companies?
Yeah, so it boils down to this platform publisher distinction. So the idea is when the internet came online in the 1990s and you started to have independent websites. This is before social media. This law was formed that basically allowed the modern internet. Whether it's a comment on your blog or a static web 1.0, website that somebody else writes on, what Section 230 of the allowed you to do is it said if you are a platform rather than a publisher with editorial control, if you're a neutral platform and you do not exercise editorial discretion over what content is hosted, then you have a liability from lawsuits like defamation lawsuits. Like if the New York Times writes something about you, New York Times is a publisher, you can sue the New York Times for defamation. If Twitter in its kind of classical state, if they simply were a platform that hosted but did not exercise editorial discretion over what was published, then the idea is you could do a defamation lawsuit against that user who posts on that platform, but you could not sue the platform itself because it had a liability shield from Section 230. And so when all the social media companies in 2017, 2018 started exercising editorial discretion over what could be published on their platforms through their terms of service policies, it naturally created this wave of pressure and legal scholarship around violations of Section 230 because they were no longer acting as platforms. They were clearly acting as a publisher by deciding what kind of content could or couldn't be published there. And then, there's sort of a counter argument where it's saying, well, we're not deciding individually what's published. We're setting general terms of service policies. And then, so it's not like we published you're still your own publisher on our site, but there are rules to qualify for what it can be. So that fight has played out. And if you just get rid of the Section 230 entirely, all you're going to be left with is, YouTube and Facebook, because nobody else can, like Gab, for example, or like BitChute or Odyssey, or like smaller platforms will not be able to comply. Right. They'll be bankrupted very quickly. Right. So the question, I've always seen this kind of Chinese finger trap. It's like you put your fingers into the Section 230 and you can never get it out because it's just really, really hard to find the exact constellation of puzzle pieces that protects the ability to have a tech market online, but then also preempts the kind of censorship decisions that the American people don't like. But then you also do want to be able to have platforms have discretion over what kind of content they host. Like that. The issue is when you have these giant mega platforms that functionally are utilities, you can't operate in the modern world. Try being a salesperson without a Facebook account, an Instagram, a YouTube, a LinkedIn. You're kicked back to the industrial age. Yeah. You can't have a modern job. You can't be a mom and pop florist shop unless you can promote your business. In terms of what the Trump administration is doing right now, there are things that have made me a little uncomfortable that have gone up to a certain line. There's an open question about I don't know that Lindsey Graham, actually, I'm not familiar with what he specifically said that you mentioned, but if you're saying he was threatening Section 230 enforcement. Well, I mean, to me, that's...
So you can find the clip of it, Steve. Lindsey Graham talking about Section 230 recently.
So there's a couple things here. One is, incitement to... These protections are mostly, in my view, around political speech. Like the First Amendment is a protection of speech, but there are... you don't have protection to incite violence, for example. Right. And there's standards. There's something called the Brandenburg standard. Brandenburg v. Ohio was a case from a couple decades ago that established where the line is about incitement. There has to be an imminent threat to bodily harm. It can't be it's First Amendment protected speech to, say, I think someone should die, or, but there are lines where if you say,
go here now and do this.
Right, exactly. If it's imminent, this is fire in a movie theater type type thing. And so, with the Charlie Kirk stuff, I think that you've got this really kind of dangerous moment where you had what I think is the most high-profile assassination in modern history, and done in a way that was way more vivid than any assassination, I think, in world history. I mean, we don't know what JFK looked like when it took years for the Zapruder film to come out. Right. Even that was fuzzy.
Like 10 years
gray.
Or something.
Yeah. But
can you imagine if we had social media during the 60s?
Yeah. But with Charlie, you saw right away. I mean, you saw the life leave his body. You saw the close-up shots are absolutely gory and gruesome, and it was done in broad daylight at an open college event. And there is, it's not, if you say, assassinate Mike Benz next, assassinate, Danny Jones next, there is a kind of, well, this is not really like political speech. This is, incitement to violence. And the question is it actually incitement?
Right.
Now it's one thing to say, Charlie Kirk sucked. He was a horrible person. He's, or even to say something like it's a good thing he died or that. So that's uncouth. It's completely distasteful. Yeah. I completely disagree with it. That would be like a political commentary on an event. You have seen a lot of language that is really dark in that gray zone. Like when you see someone say Matt Walsh next, and then you see that person is, got like a 65,000 followers and has like a history. Maybe the tweet right before that was them drawing, like a bullet point, laser sight on on the thing. And, I think I'm not as worried about, for the free speech environment, about some of the things that are happening with this Charlie Kirk thing, because this is not like this is a healthcare dispute or immigration dispute or a DEI. This is like, you have to. I mean, you look at what happened with this ICE shooting, like the week after Charlie Kirk, right? This guy goes in and engraves bullets that say anti-ICE and goes in, shoots up this ICE facility, and evidently kills like migrants detained there. But he had engravings just like the Charlie Kirk shooter, and there were a couple other weird things that were so. But I don't think in general that the conservative base has wants to replicate what Democrats and the kind of never Trump Republicans did in the 2020 era. Mm-hmm. There isn't, the only thing that I've seen that comes close to that line so far, because if Lindsey Graham says that, there were so many times that was said by Republicans during Russiagate. You had the Republican-controlled House Intelligence Committee, threatening Section 230 against that. This is one of the reasons that it went this far with censorship, because the Democrats were calling for censorship, but the Republicans who were in control of Congress at the time were all like these neocon Republican types who were all part of this like Russiagate blob, and they wanted to crack down on Russian disinformation too, and they were threatening Section 230 alongside Donald Trump. But I think when Pam Bondi made that statement about hate speech, she quickly ran into the ire of the base over that, and she issued, I think, what was intended to be a clarification where she said, I meant hate speech that crosses the line into incitement to violence. And so I think that was an attempt to say, like, because a lot of these people, their regular jobs, they're not fluid with the language and the distinctions. Her job is running the Justice Department. She doesn't have like a bachelor's in disinformation studies and this sort of thing. And so I think she probably just grabbed the nearest available term for, speech that we will take action against. But obviously we don't want action just on, we want to copy Europe style hate speech laws. So, but obviously if you have incitement to violence, you don't need hate speech first. But so I think that she did try to correct that to make
Yeah.
it synchronize with free speech principles. There is this question about whether or not the FCC applied pressure around the Jimmy Kimmel thing.
Nexstar.
Yeah, but I don't actually know what the underlying facts on the ground were about what the FCC actually did in that case. I know there were allegations that there was pressure to potentially hold up like a merger. At the end of the day, it lasted a week, and even Sinclair is back on, with Kimmel. So I think that every movement is prone to passions. The question is whether they become institutionalized. The relationship between the State Department and CIA and the music industry, I sort of started in the 1940s with jazz diplomacy. This was this period where the World War II had just ended, and we are now in a fight for geopolitical control over all the different neutral countries in the world against the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union has this communist government, and they're making appeals to Africa, among other places, saying that the capitalist society in the West is racist, they're discriminating against black people, there's all this class injustice, so African countries should sign economic partnerships with the Soviet Union. They should have their governments be more in line with the Soviet Union because they're more egalitarian. And so this was a lot of how the J. Edgar Hoover FBI was sort of calling a lot of folks who were pro-civil rights. They were calling them communists and Soviets because the Soviet Union was amplifying these kind of, there's racial discrimination against African American, stuff on their own media channels. And so in Africa, what the State Department did is it took, who were very popular at the time, these black jazz musicians, Louis Armstrong and the like, and would fly them as essentially music diplomats to Africa, and making the point to African diplomats and African civil society organizations that actually the West does not discriminate. The Soviets are wrong. And so you had these musical ambassador types of being flown around by, on taxpayer dime. And then with classical music around the same time, the CI starts something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which is this big arts and literature and music hub. It's basically hundreds of poets, musicians, thought leaders in the art space, in the culture space, in the music space. Gloria Steinem was a part of that with the feminist movement. But among that were classical musicians. So at the time, Shostakovich and these kind of Russian classical composers were seen to be superior to like Western classical musicians. And so even in the classical music hub, the CIA organizes these conferences through the musical conferences, musical exchanges, musical concerts in Rome, in Paris, in Germany, through this CIA-funded cutout, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, in order to show that actually Western classical music is, competes on par and is better than Russian classical music. And then you had the whole rock and roll movement, where you had this export to essentially behind the Iron Curtain. You had this anti-authoritarian, challenging the government, rock music space. And a lot of this stuff was sponsored by the U.S. government, sponsoring rock concerts by the Berlin Wall to try to, show that we're against the, the big government of the Soviet Union and against Big Brother. Then you had this in the rap space. You mentioned Cuba. So in the early 2000s, the CIA, USAID, the State Department really began to turn attention to the rap and hip hop space as it, achieved this kind of cultural saturation, and did this in a bunch of countries. So a very famous one is this group called the San Isidro Collective in Cuba. In 2009, this CIA cutout called the National Endowment for Democracy, it was conceived of by the CIA director in 1983. The CIA gets a copy of every single grant that they give. This was disclosed in 1986 in the Washington Post. Its founder says, we were created because the CIA used to get in trouble in the 1960s and 70s. I'm sorry, groups seen as subsidized by the CIA were scandalized by that. So our endowment, NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, was set up so that we could fund the groups that the CIA, they'd be too scandalized to get from the CIA. Meanwhile, the CIA gets a copy of every single one of their grants, so it's just an empty cutout for it. So in 2009, they write this memo. They have this in-house journal called the Journal of Democracy. We pay for it as taxpayers. And in this 2009 memo, they're talking about how their attempts at regime change in Cuba have been unsuccessful, and they should try a more targeted Afro-Cuban strategy, because the Afro-Cuban population is actually is higher, I think, than it's like the highest, most popular demographic in Cuba, and yet they're underrepresented in the Cuban government, and there are grievances that can be inflamed in Cuba on that basis. And they did this demographic survey. Again, this is a CIA cutout doing this, and they say, okay, well, the Afro-Cuban population is disproportionately unemployed, prone to using drugs, and has cultural salience communicated through rap and hip hop music. A year later, they begin funding together with USAID. So it's USAID, which is a giant CIA money funnel, plus the CIA's effectively proprietary cutout, begin funneling money and aid to this rap collective called the San Isidro Movement, who pens this anthem about taking to the streets to rebel against the government. At the same time, USAID sets up a fake Twitter in Cuba. It's called Zunzanillo. This is a big scandal where humanitarian funds were earmarked for Pakistan by USAID, and then they were diverted through Cayman Islands banks to set up a Twitter knockoff. Because in 2009, 2010, this is when the Arab Spring was going on.
Right.
So you had these CIA social media revolutions, and so they wanted to bring a Cuban Spring there. So they have these insider documents that end up leaking a couple years later, where they say that the goal is to attract people, because Cuba at the time had banned Twitter, and so they wanted to make this look like this was by Cubans for Cubans. So USAID got these two unsuspecting business executives to set up this Twitter knockoff. The plan was, according to the USAID documents, to attract them by advertising a social media website that would emphasize sports, music, and hurricane updates. And then once they hit 100,000 subscribers, they would switch to anti-government political messaging. And so this group, by the way, the San Isidro Movement, and their anthem they penned to try to get people to take to the streets in a color revolution, you can still see odes to this in Art Basel in Miami. I live in Miami. You still see this. Miami was the biggest CIA hub for the whole Cold War. There was the station JM Wave, the Miami station, was the largest CIA hub in the world. And because Miami was so close to, it's giant port city, and it's the Caribbean, it's Central America, you get the South America tip. So anyway, even today in 2024, the Biden administration overthrew the government of Bangladesh. They did so in part through NED grants, this CIA cutout, grants to Bangladeshi hip hop artists. And even these documents leaked where NED actually wrote back to the State Department that they funded these two rap and hip hop videos that were designed to get people to take to the streets, to sow distrust in government, to inflame tensions between the youth and unemployed people and the government not serving them. And the Biden administration at the same time opened up this brand new center called the Global Music Diplomacy Bureau within the State Department. And the State Department is what coordinates CIA and USAID. So I think in 2024, they brought 22 rap and hip hop artists from 14 different countries for a 3-day training session at the State Department. They're training them how to mobilize youth, how to get people to the streets. And this is another big thing with these concerts. They simulate street mobilization.
Right.
When you get all these people together in the street, you get them in the practice of taking to the street, and they put aside all the differences they might have with each other on grievance grounds. Like, for example, there was an underground rock scene that the CIA and State Department worked with in Yugoslavia in the 1990s when they were backing something called the Otpor movement, which is kind of the origins of this like iron fist for all these color revolutions. And what the whole purpose is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You have all these groups who don't necessarily like each other, but when they are infighting, they can't form a unified front to win an election or to rally behind like an opposition candidate who will take the place of the leadership. So having the backdrop for organizing being music everyone likes rather than abortion, when half of the people might not, have religious differences, so they might not want to organize about that. Or, tax policy, when half of the people you might want to recruit are business owners or the like. Or, energy policy, when half of the people might like cheap fossil fuels, half of the people might like, renewable energy. Mm-hmm. But the music cuts through all of that. We're all together. We have one thing in common, which is that we hate this government. But now we're all marching together. We're all in the streets together. We're all vibing to the same music. And so, you see this all the time. And this is also another thing, like Bono, for example, who's been kind of my bête noire on some of this USAID stuff because, Bono's out here talking about how USAID has, the cuts to USAID have killed 300,000 people so far. And it's like,
did he say that?
He did. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's citing this Boston University study, which is complete garbage. Even in the study itself, it's like, well, we don't count duplicate deaths. So theoretically, if someone dies from dysentery, AIDS, Ebola, SARS, Zika, and MERS, we count that as 12 deaths. And none of these things, nobody's auditing this. Like, basically, a lot of people see me as like a force behind this USAID shutdown. And that was a major blow to the capacity of a lot of these intelligence operations, these covert influence operations. As I just mentioned, USAID is running the rap game in many countries, let alone what it's doing in terms of impacting markets, what it's doing in terms of impacting governments. So there's a lot of people who are very angry at that, but they can't really think of a good reason to keep it in light of the fact that you don't see a lot of foreign leaders complaining about USAID being shut down. Like when Trump announced the shutdown of USAID, the president of Mexico came out and said, "Thank God." The president of El Salvador came out and said, "Thank God." The heads of the drug commissions in Peru said, "Thank God," because when Bolivia banned USAID, they finally got cocaine under control. Turned out the USAID cocaine programs were responsible in large part for keeping the cocaine going, which is a common story here because, you saw the same thing in Afghanistan. You saw the same thing in Syria. You saw the same thing, the Golden Triangle, the Golden Crescent, in Colombia and the like. But anyway, I think the music stuff is so interesting because, you have like the military, I think in 2023 began this massive sponsorship of South by Southwest. In Miami, where I live, the largest music performing arts center, it's called the Adrian Arsh Center. Adrian Arsh is one of the top 5 largest donors to the Atlantic Council, which is 7 CIA directors on its board. It's funded by the Pentagon, the State Department, USAID, and it bills itself as NATO's think tank. And, the benefactor for that is doing the largest performing arts center in Miami. And a lot of this is because politics is downstream of culture.
Right.
And so, if you can influence the culture and influence the mythology, you effectively set the bounds for what's politically possible. This woman from Graphica, from the exact place, partnered with the NATO Center of Excellence on disinformation. And what she's going to pitch to them, and I didn't even know this at the time. We were just going through this because I was giving a lecture on AI censorship, because this was about how to use, you see, an identification. They've got these Graphica style network node maps and segmentation, so she's giving this talk about how NATO needs to spend more money on these AI-based censorship firms, and that's the key for NATO winning the information war. But buried in the middle of this, so excuse the F-bombs that may come flying out of this, you'll see, and just maybe we'll just start with the punchline so it's not missed there. If you zoom into the goal example, you see that right there?
Top right.
Yeah, top right.
Can you punch in on that, Steve?
You'll see what she's telling this room full of NATO generals is to identify key actors to train and spread desired messaging. And that is a picture of Taylor Swift, as you will hear her confirm. So the U.S. government is funding this conference. The U.S. government is leading NATO, is trying to get solicitations from these outside experts on how NATO can win the information war, and how it can put down domestic revolts in their own countries from these right-wing populist parties who are running on neutrality and cheap energy with Russia. And so the goal is to get people like Taylor Swift to train and spread desired messaging. The example, encourage opinion leaders to share counter information operation and content. But the risk is that opinion leaders may not want to share content or may accidentally share misleading. So anyway, listen to her go through this.
Okay, let's run it, Steve.
And the most common is working with famous people or main influencers to share information or a particular message. So I include Taylor Swift in here because...
Are you fucking kidding me? NATO Psychological Operations Unit. It's on the screen. Center of Excellence. The NATO Center of Excellence. In 2019, Taylor fucking Swift, who I probably rage posted about 1,400 times about as a geopolitical instrument of statecraft because her goddamn IP discography was purchased by the fucking Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group, the private equity arm of the Iraq War, with Dick Cheney on its board and the entire Halliburton, West Texas oil mafia. They were the literal funders and profiteers of the entire West Texas military mafia, and it was jointly bought by the Carlyle Group and the Soros Group, who's the London and New York financier
Soros
class of West Texas.
The
so the fucking military industrial complex, plus its energy stakeholders who rely on the battering ram of the Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA, but Taylor Swift's discography. She had to re-record her own shit last year in order to win her right, in order to have parallel tracks.
Right? She had to re-record her own songs. So that ones that she had rights to.
Biden in 2020
because George Soros and the Carlyle Group
she won Time Magazine's Person of the Year this year. And I think it was the Wall Street Journal that hypothesized that Taylor Swift would be Biden's, quote, secret weapon to win the 2024 election. Oh, and by the way, her Eras Tour, which is has the economy of I think top 20 nation states by GDP in the entire globe. Her tour. Taylor Swift is a cultural battering ram.
Pause right there. So what happened here is, again, understand NATO and the EU are like the same. Just the commercial arm and the military arm are the same thing.
Okay.
And so the EU, the head of the EU, came out and solicited Taylor Swift when she was like wrapping up her Eras tour to do another leg in Europe ahead of the European election so that she could do a get out the vote drive for pro-EU candidates. It's the same thing that they're doing with NATO narratives in a general sense. They're trying to rig elections. They're doing the Beyonce strategy that you outlined. But this is another one of these things. And actually, if you go to my page and you type in Rumsfeld, if you go to my X account, I'll just show you another example of this. Just since we're hitting on the military and the music.
Yeah. So she sold her IP to George Soros and the Carlyle Group.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't, she tried to buy it back and they refused?
Well, because I think it was, I don't know that, I mean, there's a whole operation around her. I don't know that she necessarily wanted to do it or if it was done through her. I think she sued her, like, was it Scooter Braun?
Scooter, yes.
Yeah, she sued, I think she said she didn't really consent or she was misled about the thing. And she has got some lawsuit against all of them. I don't know what the status of it is. Wait, scroll down a little bit. Scroll down, or is that the only one? Okay. How about Copeland? Type in Copeland. So, because we're getting to this, how does this music get distributed and things like this? Okay, so take All right, before we play this, I'm just going to read. So here's Miles Copeland, the manager of Sting and the Police, producer for REM, Dead Kennedys, and more, talking about how the Pentagon recruited him to swing hearts and minds in the Middle East. Now, a little bit.
Wow.
Now, Miles Copeland, before he was the manager of Sting and the Police and producer for REM and all these groups, his, was it father, or I think it was his father, maybe grandfather. Miles, the original, I think this is Miles, the original Miles Copeland was one of the founding members of the OSS and was part of the original group that did the CIA's first covert action in Italy in 1948. He wrote a book. If you open up a new tab and you type in Miles Copeland, Cloak and Dagger. Yeah, inside the CIA.
Okay.
This one. Now,
wow.
Now, in this book, he writes that as one of the guys who operationally carried out the CIA's first election rigging event. This was the April 1948 Italy election. This is what effectively convinced the State Department to give the CIA its plausible deniability cloak because of how effective this operation was, and they wanted to scale it around the world. And he writes in here that if the CIA had not interfered in that election, the pro-U.S. candidate would have lost 60-40, and we couldn't have done it without the help of the Italian mafia.
Wow.
Who was our boots on the ground stuffing ballot boxes and breaking up opposition meetings. And so, Copeland, I forget if it's the son or the grandson, but, becomes this big music producer. And then we'll play, we'll just play this 50 seconds, I think.
So I get a call from Donald Rumsfeld. My secretary comes up to me and says, Miles, it's Donald Rumsfeld on the phone. I go, yeah, sure.
Okay, pause right there. Pause right there. Let's read this. Okay. Copeland was brought to the Pentagon 3 times to advise the Bush administration on propaganda plans in the Middle East, including the notion of filming a Bon Jovi concert in Damascus, in Syria.
With the crowd waving tiny American flags.
So this, again, is like giant outdoor music concerts, artists you know and love, Taylor Swift, Bono, Bon Jovi. And we're in the middle of the war on terror. 9/11 is just happened. And so the Pentagon is working directly with the music industry in order to have this propaganda shape the hearts and minds, to shape the elections, to install the control apparatus. But you wonder, why is it that you've got the military all up in the Taylor Swift thing through the Carlyle Group and the Soros Group and through Graphica and the NATO Center of Excellence? Why is it that you've got Bono doing the war profiteering, for the Ukraine war, but breaking up, paramilitary threats against the UK coming from the Irish? Why is it that the Pentagon is sponsoring South by Southwest? Why is it that you've got these Pentagon USAID contracts to Bangladeshi hip hop artists and Cuban rap groups and the military effectively sponsoring rock concerts at the Berlin Wall? And it's the same thing over and over again. But if you just play the clip, you'll see how it plays out.
Pick up the phone, thinking this is a joke. And it's the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Tori Clark. And she says, we hear that you know about our music, and we think there might be a way to win hearts and minds in the Middle East. And would you help us come up with some programs that we might do and put forward that helps us, make the Iraqis not hate us, Well, I said, well, sure, I'm a loyal American. I'm happy to help.
The plan is to find 12 girls who will be the basis of a show featuring Arab dance and Arab music.
Okay, all right, we'll pause there. But it's everywhere. We do this everywhere. It's a checklist item.
It's insane.